The rip of fabric snapped through the grand lobby like a blade slicing the air, and in an instant Grace Turner's dress was yanked upward before hundreds of eyes frozen between horror and vicious excitement. Laughter shattered around her like exploding glass. Phones lifted. The entire space erupted into a cruel frenzy, and none of them knew that the woman they were humiliating was the wife of the most powerful man in this entire system. Grace stood still for the length of a single breath, her eyes wide but not panicked. Her face tightened like a violin string pulled past its limit, then went strangely calm. She did not scream, did not hit, did not shove. She only pulled her dress back down with hands trembling slightly, as if she were holding a piece of glass about to break. Then raised her chin and looked straight at Dylan Brooks, the young intern, with the smug grin of someone who believed he had just won a game fueled by a cheering crowd. In that moment, Grace's heart clenched. A scorching heat rushed across her face, and all she could hear beneath the toxic roar spreading across the marble hall was the pounding of her own heartbeat. But deep inside that chaos, one thought hardened: you cannot collapse, not in front of them. She turned away, her flat shoes brushing lightly against the stone floor, and walked out of the crowd that was feeding on its own cruelty. Near the elevators, a few female employees covered their mouths, pretending to be shocked, yet their eyes flickered with sick curiosity. Someone whispered, "She is not reacting at all. That is so strange." Those murmurs pricked at Grace's back with every step. Her heart felt heavy, but her hand instinctively found the silver necklace resting against her chest, the gift Jackson Turner had given her during the simplest days of their life together. Her fingers touched the cold pendant, and its coolness tugged her back from the humiliation tightening around her ribs. The elevator doors slid shut, sealing off the laughter outside, and only then did Grace dare take a deep breath, her chest rising with the weight of the pain she had held down. But beneath the silence, a wave rose disappointment in the very place she had quietly dedicated years of her life under the guise of being ordinary. The simple life she chose to understand her employees, to feel the true pulse of Summit dynamics, had now become the chain that made her a target. Out there, Dylan was still laughing high, fiving the ones who treated another person's dignity like cheap entertainment. Yet behind his grin, there was a faint unease, the sense that her silence carried more force than any outburst he had hoped for. On the 28th floor, inside a glass office overlooking the city of Seattle, Jackson Turner, 41 years old, sharp and composed, had just received an urgent call from the internal monitoring system. His face tightened as he watched the clip sent to him. No one in the lobby knew that every move they had made was about to wake the storm sleeping under the calm of a man powerful enough to reshape an entire corporation before noon. Meanwhile, Grace stepped out of the elevator. Her emotions tangled her throat tight, yet her stride steady. She did not know that her silence in the midst of that cruel laughter had created the first fracture, the fracture that would shake Summit dynamics in the days ahead. And when she placed her hand on her desk, her breath still trembling, a thought flashed like a shard of glass against her heart. If this is how they treat someone they believe is nobody, what will they face when the truth comes out? The next morning, when the sunlight over Seattle had not yet pierced the thin layer of mist across the sky, the offices of Summit Dynamics buzzed, as if nothing terrible had happened the night before. But to Grace Turner, everything felt sharper, every glance on every face like a hidden needle stitched beneath silk. She walked into the lobby with her fabric tote swinging at her side in the same unassuming way it always did. And that alone made some people look at her with even more contempt. Vanessa Hill, drenched in sharp perfume and wearing an expensive scarf, rolled her eyes the moment she saw Grace pass. Look at that, she still showed up. She murmured her syrupy voice loud enough for the nearby group to burst out laughing. Grace paused for a heartbeat, then continued walking, revealing nothing except the slight tightening of her fingers around the strap of her bag. At the open desk area of the marketing department, Lisa Grant had already pulled up a post on the internal network, where she had uploaded a photo of Grace's lunchbox from the day before with the caption, "Fine Dining Disaster Edition." As Grace walked by, Lisa spun her chair around, crossed her arms, and laughed loudly. "Hey, Grace, what haute couture meal do you have today?" The air around them vibrated with laughter, louder than it needed to be, as if the entire office needed a target to hold together their fake sense of fun. Grace did not reply. She simply placed her stack of files on her desk, each movement soft yet decisive. Somehow, that silence made Lisa pause for just 1 second, revealing a flicker of irritation, as if the insult had failed to land. At the IT corner, Greg Sanders and his friends were replaying the video from the lobby. Bursts of laughter shot up again and again. Greg smirked and said loudly enough for half the floor to hear, "It would have been better if she reacted. Standing there like a post is boring." Another guy chimed in, "Maybe she likes the attention." Their laughter wasn't subtle, and Grace heard every word as she passed. She slowed for a brief moment, then moved on. Inside her, a thin, sharp ache stretched quietly, but her face remained as calm as still water. In the small meeting room at 10 o'clock, Rachel Porter, always proud of her project manager title, cut directly into Grace's contract update with a pointed remark. "Hold on, why is an intern presenting this section?" A muted wave of laughter rippled through the room. Grace looked up, her eyes deep and steady. "I am not an intern." Rachel let out a short laugh and glanced at Grace's simple outfit. "Well, you do not look like someone with a real position." This time, a few people shifted awkwardly. Even the hum of the air conditioner seemed to pause for a beat at Rachel's bluntness. After lunch in the pantry, Mike Dalton leaned against the counter, his cologne mixing with the scent of coffee, and looked Grace up and down before saying, "Janitor is early today, planning to clean us up before the meeting." His colleague snickered behind him, but one pair of eyes in the distance, Ellen Ross, tightened slightly. When Grace began to leave the room, Ellen called softly, "Grace." She stopped. Ellen took a breath and whispered, "What they are doing, it is not right." The words were light, but touched a place Grace had locked away. For a single moment her eyes softened. Then she gave a small, gentle smile. "Thank you." Meanwhile, on the 28th floor, Jackson Turner was reviewing internal schedules and personnel reports. The more he read, the tighter his chest became. He could feel something slipping out of the disciplined, respectful order he had built. The stillness before the storm was beginning to spread down every floor of the building without anyone realizing it. At her desk, Grace straightened her files, each folder, a steadying rhythm keeping her from collapsing. But deep inside, a question cut through her relentlessly. If they can trample me this badly, just because of a simple appearance, how many others are suffering the same thing with no one noticing? And in that very moment, no one knew that the quiet hurt burning inside her would soon become the spark for the greatest shift Summit Dynamics had ever seen. That afternoon, as the sunlight slanted through the tall glass windows of Summit Dynamics, the atmosphere in the office shifted abruptly, as if someone had flipped an invisible switch that sent a mix of arrogance and curiosity spreading through the hallways. Rumors about a serious ethical incident continued to race through the building at the speed of electricity. But no one believed it had anything to do with them. They still thought someone like Grace Turner could never be important enough to pull a storm toward the company. Yet there were small signs, very small ones, hinting at the opposite. At the analyst's desk cluster, Tim Harper was flipping through a set of old documents in the internal archive. He was not the type to meddle in the affairs of others, but the name Grace Turner appearing in a dust-covered legacy report made him stop. Turner, a surname not unfamiliar in the finance world. He leaned closer, his brows drawing together, when he saw the note, Strategic Contract Advisor, Foundational Summit Dynamics, Project Founding Phase. A cold ripple ran down his spine. He remembered clearly the woman the entire office had been gossiping about that morning. It could not simply be a shared name, but the look in her eyes, the strange depth of her silence, none of it aligned with the job title of contract assistant she currently held. Tim looked around. The room was still laughing and chattering, oblivious to anything unusual. He wanted to call Grace to ask directly, but feared he might be stepping into something beyond his authority. He exhaled softly, opened his laptop, yet his mind remained tangled. On the lower floor in the mailroom, Ben Morales, a man who had spent nearly 2 decades at Summit Dynamics, opened a package of internal correspondence. The recipient's name made him pause. Grace Turner Board Consultant Legacy File. Ben blinked. He had seen this name before many years ago, back when the company was still laying its foundation. Through the glass, he spotted Grace, walking down the hallway, her calm demeanor making anyone believe she was the least threatening person in the building. Ben called out quietly, just loud enough for her to hear Miss Turner, "Important mail for you." When she turned back, her eyes widened slightly in surprise. "Thank you," Grace said, her voice low and soft like morning mist. Ben wanted to say more, but hesitated and let it go. He did not know that simply calling her by her surname with respect made a silent corner of Grace's heart tremble, because very few in the office ever did. In the pantry, the marketing team was preparing another stunt. Lisa lifted her phone, her voice stretched with mockery. "Hey, Grace, rumor has it, the CEO is taking an ordinary employee out for lunch." "Maybe it is you." Laughter erupted, but a few people had begun to sense something off. Ever since the internal email circulated, the entire building had been on edge, half frightened, half curious. When news spread that the CEO had invited an unknown employee for a private meeting, everyone immediately pointed to Grace. But in that very moment, something no one expected happened. Grace declined. She read the email, her eyes cold as a winter lake. She typed a brief reply and sent it, "Thank you, but I need to finish my work first." One sentence yet, enough to make Tim Ben and a handful of seasoned employees freeze. Ordinary people do not decline a CEO. People who fear their boss certainly never would. People who do not need their boss are the ones who do. And that planted a growing suspicion in their minds. The afternoon stretched on, with whispers buzzing like a hive torn open. Mike mocked that Grace did not know her place. Vanessa insisted that Grace was trying to act special. Rachel claimed Grace did not understand her low status. But only Ellen, sitting at her desk in the corner, noticed the opposite. Grace's silence that day was not submission. It was something sharper, colder. As if Grace knew something the rest of the office did not. On the top floor, Jackson Turner stood looking over the city, his hand tightening slightly on the glass railing. He had reviewed all the data, watched every recording, listened to every report from the people he trusted. And with each passing second, his emotions tightened like coiled steel. He knew very clearly that the moment he stepped into this building, the false polish Summit Dynamics had worn for years would crack apart piece by piece. And when he appeared, the ones laughing today would not be laughing anymore. At her desk, Grace set the letter down and lifted her gaze toward the shifting patterns of light on the ceiling. For the first time in many weeks, the corner of her lips curved into a small smile. A smile no one saw. A smile that signaled tomorrow would be unlike any day this building had ever known. The next morning, the air inside Summit Dynamics felt so dense it could have been sliced with a knife. Footsteps were quicker, keyboard clicks sharper, and every pair of eyes kept drifting toward the main entrance, as if waiting for an invisible judge to appear. Rumors that the chairman of Global Summit Holdings, Jackson Turner, would arrive in person, had spread like wildfire. Yet, in the middle of that tense atmosphere, a smaller toxic confrontation was unfolding in the 12th floor hallway, as Grace Turner walked in, with shoulders calm, in a way that unsettled those watching. Vanessa Hill stood blocking the path with Lisa and Mike. Beside her, 3 people who had turned mocking Grace into a daily ritual. Vanessa folded her arms, her eyes scanning Grace from head to toe, as if searching for flaws in a cheap product. "I am being honest here, Grace," she sneered. "With everything going on, you should really take the day off. The corporation is reviewing culture standards. The company needs a better image." "You understand," Lisa burst into laughter, her voice sharp and acidic. "Yes, with her around. No wonder people think we work like amateurs." Mike placed a hand lightly on Grace's shoulder, as if pitying her. "No offense, but you really bring down the whole vibe." The hallway suddenly felt quieter, because what bothered them most was not that they insulted Grace, but that she did not react at all. She stood upright, her eyes neither angry nor shaken, only carrying a calm so unreadable it looked like a flat lake, moments before a violent storm. "I am here to work," Grace said, just one sentence, then stepped past them. Her voice was soft, but sharp enough that all 3 froze, as if a cold wind had slapped them across the face. From a nearby desk, Ellen Ross watched Grace walk away, her eyes filled with worry and a quiet admiration, because she had never seen anyone stay that calm, almost frighteningly calm in the midst of such cruelty. Trying to shake off the feeling, Vanessa flipped her hair and laughed loudly to regain control of the moment. She really does not know her place. But the laugh sounded hollow. Even Vanessa felt her heart tighten strangely, like a warning, whispering that something very wrong was approaching. Across the office, clusters of people whispered in panic. "I heard Mr. Turner already landed." "Really? Why would he come in person? Because of that ethical incident or whatever?" "Oh Lord, whoever is involved is doomed." And like a chain reaction, their eyes turned toward Grace, dripping with suspicion, disdain, and a faint relief that maybe it was not them. But only the perceptive ones noticed one thing. Grace was not nervous. Her hand moved steadily across her stack of documents, her gaze calm and grounded, as if she already knew exactly what was about to happen. On the 28th floor, Jackson Turner walked down the hallway with a slow, commanding stride, his dark gray blazer framing his broad shoulders, his eyes sharp like Seattle fog split open by streetlights. Every employee he passed instantly straightened their posture, swallowing hard, as no one had ever seen him appear at a regional headquarters without warning. He stopped before the main conference room and looked down through the glass railing, watching the hundreds of employees working below, unaware that every breath and every word spoken in the past 48 hours had been captured by his monitoring system. But he was not looking for the directors nor the managers. He was looking for one person. The one who had been so silent. The world mistook her for fragile, yet so strong. Her silence broke his heart every time he thought of it. At 9:27, the elevator doors on the 12th floor slid open. A thin gust of air carried the echo of authoritative footsteps onto the polished stone. One employee glanced up first, eyes widening in disbelief, then another, and then an entire row of desks seemed to freeze all at once. Jackson Turner, the chairman himself, was walking in. And the first person his gaze sought was not the leadership team, not the supervisors, but Grace Turner sitting quietly at her desk, with eyes as deep and still as a silent lake. Vanessa dropped her phone. Mike went rigid, unable to breathe. Lisa felt her legs hollow out beneath her. Because in that single moment, they finally understood that the storm they mocked as gossip was, in fact, standing right behind them. And they, whether by malice or carelessness, had placed themselves at the very center of it. The entire 12th floor fell into a suffocating silence the moment Jackson Turner stepped inside, the air compressing, as if it were about to burst. He did not walk quickly, yet every step carried a weight that made the stone floor seem to tremble, turning those who had mocked Grace into statues of fear. Jackson did not look at anyone except one place, the desk, in the far left corner where Grace was sitting. She rose before he reached her, her hands clasping softly together, her gaze calm yet deep, as if holding thousands of unspoken wounds. When Jackson stopped in front of her, the silence twisted so tightly it felt like the room itself was holding its breath. No one in the office had ever seen him this close, and certainly no one could have imagined the shock they were about to witness. Jackson placed a hand on Grace's shoulder, his eyes softening in a way that belonged only to two people who had lived through too many memories together. Then he pulled her into a slow, steady embrace, intimate enough to feel like a slap of reality across the entire room. A gasp cut through the air. A pen fell to the floor. Someone took a step back, as if trying to escape their own shadow. Jackson released her, held her hand, and turned to face the dozens of pale faces. His voice rang out low and sharp, each word slicing through the false image Summit Dynamics had been hiding behind. I want every one of you to know this is my wife. This is the co-founder of the operational system. This company depends on every single day. This is the person who wrote the foundation of the first contracts that kept Summit Dynamics standing during its first 5 years. A deadly silence followed, then scattered broken whispers. Wife, co-founder, no way, but Jackson was not finished. He scanned every face, the same faces that had mocked, humiliated, and dismissed her. His gaze was cold as frozen water. And what has happened to her in the past 2 days has shown me exactly how rotten the culture in this place has become. The words slammed down like a hammer. Vanessa felt her knees weaken her lips, trembling as she remembered blocking Grace's path and mocking her that very morning. Mike stood, frozen, his hand still resting on the pantry counter, as if unable to accept that the world he knew had just collapsed. Lisa covered her mouth eyes wide as the memory of her cruel posts flashed through her mind. Dylan could barely breathe. Terror swallowed him whole as he relived yanking Grace's dress in the lobby and realized he had humiliated the wife of the most formidable man in the company. In the far corner, Ellen placed a hand over her chest, feeling as if she had just witnessed something her heart had quietly hoped for, the truth finally brought into the light. Jackson continued, his voice lower but heavy as stone. She chose to come here as an ordinary employee to understand this company's culture. None of you knew that. But the way you treated someone you assumed was, nobody has shown me exactly where this place now stands. No one moved. No one dared blink. Jackson turned to Grace, his gaze softening only for her. Grace tightened her grip on his hand, then stepped forward, facing the entire office. She did not cry. She was not angry. She stood with a steadiness that made everyone feel stripped bare. And then, from the corner of the room, the sound of a paper cup dropping made every head turn. Jared stood, frozen, his face drained of color. Jackson looked at him as if seeing straight through his soul. You will work directly with the ethics investigation team. And the only advice I have for you is this: be honest. A cold shiver ran down every spine. Jackson turned back to the entire office. I will clean this place, and that begins today. When he finished, it felt as if the gravity in the room had doubled. Grace looked around, her mind still and clear, even though her heart carried the remnants of pain. But now, with Jackson beside her, she no longer stood alone. And everyone in that office understood one thing with absolute certainty: that embrace in front of the entire floor was the first toll of the death knell for those who had written their own names onto the list of people who would pay the price. I Right after Jackson Turner delivered his thunderous declaration, the entire office of Summit Dynamics fell into a heavy, muted chaos, the kind where every sound felt trapped inside thick glass, making each person hear their own heartbeat louder than the typing around them. And in that frozen tension, the internal investigation messages from the ethics board were sent out sharp and fast, like arrows cutting through every corner of the building. Those who had laughed just yesterday now collapsed inward, like puppets, with their strings cut. Vanessa Hill was the first name called. Her eyes widened. Her hands shook so hard, her phone nearly slipped from her grasp. She tried to regain her usual arrogant composure, but her lips twitched uncontrollably, her voice warping as she attempted excuses with her coworkers, only to meet their averted gazes. The pride that once made her stand out in the sales department had now turned into the chain tightening around her own mistakes. Mike Dalton stood frozen beside the coffee counter, the same place where only hours earlier he had mocked Grace as a janitor. He swallowed hard, grabbed a cup of water, and dropped it the spill, spreading across the floor like the hollow confidence draining from his body. Dylan Brooks, the one who started it all, shrank into himself, as if swallowed by a shadow that devoured every trace of light around him. Just yesterday, he had bragged about his achievement in a private group chat, and now he was silently deleting every file in panic, though fear had already tightened its grip far too late. He remembered vividly the look in Grace's eyes when she said, "Do not touch me." A look he now understood was not from someone weak, but someone who knew beyond doubt that truth itself would defend her. Meanwhile, Lisa Grant sank into her chair, her hands tangled in her hair until it turned messy. She had thought she was only joining the fun, but now the photos she posted mocking Grace were slicing back toward her reputation like sharp blades. She let out a soft sob, but no one dared approach her. The office was no longer a workplace. It had turned into a courtroom where each person became the defendant of their own actions. In the far left corner, where sunlight streamed through the window, Grace Turner stood still, her eyes no longer carrying the buried pain of the past days. Instead, there was resolve, a quiet strength that forced the entire room to see her differently, not with pity, not with disdain, but with fear, blended with respect. Jackson walked to the executive desk, his gaze sweeping across the room once more. Culture is not a slogan. Culture is how you treat the people you think have nothing to offer you, he said, his voice firm and heavy, carving itself into the air. No one replied. No one dared breathe too loudly. I will not allow Summit Dynamics to become a place where cruelty is normalized. He turned toward the ethics investigation team, already waiting in the hallway. Begin reviewing every individual visible in all footage and reports from the past 72 hours. The words dropped like an axe, making the atmosphere crash downward. From every department, employees were called one by one, each forced to walk toward the meeting room, with bowed heads, the door closing behind them with a heavy, ominous thud. But among all the tense faces, one person observed everything with a different expression: Ellen Ross. She was not trembling nor afraid. In fact, Ellen felt a strange sense of relief, as if someone had finally seen the hidden cruelty this office had long ignored. When Grace's eyes met hers by chance, neither spoke, yet they understood each other through a small, quiet nod. Around the office, whispers began again, but they were no longer mocking. They were full of fear. If Grace is the chairman's wife, if she is a founding shareholder, what else do we not know? We have gone too far. God, how many times have I laughed right in front of her? Those words sliced through the air like blades, cutting through the trembling of every guilty heart. But to Grace, those whispers meant nothing now. For the first time in many months, she did not feel alone. And when she looked at Jackson, who met her gaze with an expression both pained and proud, She knew this was no longer just an investigation. This was the beginning of a complete purge. And for those who had humiliated her without mercy, the most terrifying days of their lives had only just begun. The internal investigation spread through the building like an underground wave, pulling the entire office into a state of panic no one could hide. On the surface, Summit Dynamics still looked like an ordinary workday, with keyboard clicks and printers humming. But inside, every person, their pulse raced faster than the flow of information. A purge was unfolding, and no one knew how far it would go. Those who had laughed loudly, spoken boldly, and strutted confidently through the hallways now shrank back, like fading shadows. And it all began with the first statements from Dylan Brooks. He sat before 3 members of the Ethics Committee, his eyes bloodshot as if he had not slept all night. They asked him to recount every action involving Grace Turner, from yanking her dress to every mocking comment afterward. Dylan trembled so badly he had to drink water 3 times before he could speak. Broken phrases spilled out of him. I did not know. I thought she was just, I did not mean to. Each stuttering sentence pierced through the image he had spent years building for himself, the confident, admired young man of the office, now reduced to a panicked boy stripped of all armor. At the same time, Lisa Grant was ordered to provide every internal post, every hidden photo, every group chat message. Each mocking image, each cruel caption appeared on the screen, like evidence she could never escape. Lisa lowered her head to the table, her breath ragged and loud in the silent room. She whispered, I thought it was just for fun. But her words struck the committee like a slap against the moral wall they had all pretended not to see. Vanessa Hill fared no better. She was asked to detail how she blocked Grace's path and insulted her that morning. Vanessa, who once walked through the office as if everyone should step aside for her, now sat stiffly with her hands twisted together, her face drained of color. She tried to shape her lips into a calming smile, but they shook so violently it only formed a distorted grimace. She knew all too well that a woman once held up as the power figure of the sales department was about to be revealed as the smallest person in the room. Mike Dalton could no longer make eye contact with anyone. He tried explaining to the committee that he had been just joking, that every office teases each other, that he did not expect she was someone important. But the moment those final words fell, he realized he had stabbed himself. If he was willing to be cruel simply because he believed someone held no value, then what did that say about who he truly was? Meanwhile, Ellen Ross, the only person who had defended Grace, was invited into the room. She spent barely 5 minutes recounting everything clearly, calmly, without a single excuse for herself. Her honesty stunned the committee for a moment. After hours of excuses, distortions, and half-truths, Ellen's words felt like a stream of clean water sweeping through a dusty room. When she left, the employees waiting outside looked at her with surprise and admiration. She was not powerful. She was not connected to leadership, yet she had chosen the right side without waiting for permission. In the end, what weighed heaviest on the entire staff was not fear of punishment, but the horrifying realization that in this place, cruelty had become a habit, and the only person who refused to participate was now the one respected above all. In his office, Jackson Turner watched everything unfold through reports and live video feeds. But he did not look triumphant. His eyes were filled with profound disappointment, not only because of what they had done to Grace, but because of what they had allowed Summit Dynamics to become. He turned to Grace, who stood beside him, her eyes quiet, yet glowing with a strength entirely her own. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. Grace did not answer immediately. She looked out the window at the office below, where everyone was trapped in a fear they had created for themselves. Then she nodded. "I am all right, just sad for them." A simple sentence, yet enough to make Jackson close his eyes for a moment As if her pain had pressed against the place in his heart he worked hardest to keep steady. And on the floors below the doors of the investigation room continued to open and close again and again. No shouting, no dramatic scenes, just the quiet, devastating collapse of people who once believed they would never face consequences. But the most frightening truth was this: everything had only just begun. The investigation stretched late into the afternoon, like a quiet storm sweeping through every floor of Summit Dynamics. But the limit of fear shattered the moment the second warning email from the executive board was sent out, this time no longer a reminder, but a declaration individuals involved in ethical misconduct will be placed on temporary suspension pending investigation. One single line. Yet it shook the entire building like an earthquake, rolling from floor to floor. Hidden group chats exploded, dragging every name into the circle of suspicion. Vanessa is definitely getting suspended. Dylan is done for. Mike is finished. Lisa too, oh my God. But amid all the whispers and trembling panic, one person moved in a silence completely different from the rest, Grace Turner. She did not avoid anyone's eyes, but she did not linger on them either. Every step she took carried the weight of a truth about to be exposed. Every breath felt like preparation for something only she and Jackson understood. As the afternoon dragged on, the rumors moved faster, and clusters of people gathered in corners, trying to dissect Grace's every gesture, as if discovering something about her might save them. She is too calm. No one normal is that calm. If she were afraid of losing her job, she would not look like that. God, what if she has even more authority than we think? But everything erupted when the emergency notification appeared on every screen across the company. All employees report to the main lobby at 4:15 p.m. Mandatory meeting. No one said it aloud, but the air shifted instantly. It felt like the final judgment was coming, and each person swallowed the fear caught in their throat. At 4:15 p.m., the main lobby was packed. The whispers died down when Jackson Turner stepped onto the platform, a soft spotlight brushing across his face. He stood in a simple black suit, yet radiated absolute authority, his eyes sharp as a blade. And beside him, undeniable and unmoving, stood Grace Turner, calm as a still ocean. The collective gasp that escaped the crowd sounded like prey, recognizing the presence of a predator. Jackson did not speak immediately. He let the silence do its work, let fear seep into every corner of the lobby. Then he began. I stand here today not as the chairman of Global Summit Holdings. I stand here as a husband, as someone who has witnessed the cruelty that the culture of this place has allowed to grow. Someone gripped their friend's sleeve. Someone swallowed painfully. Someone else quietly cried, realizing they were part of the cycle. Jackson continued. You treated Grace Turner as if she were nothing. But let me make this very clear. She is the person who co-designed the contract system, who helped build the foundation that Summit Dynamics still operates on to this day. The soft wave of murmurs died instantly when he extended a hand toward Grace. She stepped forward, not arrogantly, not timidly, simply as someone finally returning to her rightful place. But for those watching below, it felt like the final blow, shattering whatever false confidence they had left. Jackson swept his gaze across the sea of faces, each one reflecting guilt. I have watched everything, heard everything, read everything, and I need all of you to understand this. The way you treat someone you believe is not worth respecting is the true measure of your ethics. He paused, his voice turning to heated steel. And many of you here have failed. The collapse of the crowd did not come from screaming or protesting. It came from silence, a silence so deep it carried the heartbeat of hundreds of people. That was the loudest explosion of all. Jackson nodded at the ethics team lined along both sides of the lobby. They stepped forward and began reading the list of immediate suspensions. Vanessa Hill, Vanessa dropped into her seat, her face ghostly pale, her throat unable to form a sound. Michael Dalton. Mike staggered backward, as if someone had punched the air out of him. Lisa Grant. Lisa burst into tears, hands trembling violently as she covered her face. Dylan Brooks. He lifted his head eyes, darting desperately for an escape path, but all he found were looks of disgust. When the final names were read, a deeper fear swept the room, a fear stronger than losing a job. They had misjudged the one person they should never have underestimated. Finally, Jackson rested a hand on Grace's back, a gesture that was both protective and reverent. She lifted her gaze, scanning the faces that had once caused her such pain. There was no anger in her eyes, only truth. When she spoke, the entire lobby stopped breathing. The most painful part, Grace said, her voice soft, but each word sharp as a blade, is not what you did to me. It is what you did to yourselves. Somewhere in the crowd, a choked sob escaped. And in that instant, it became clear the darkness was dragged into the light, not for revenge, but to expose them exactly as they were. Especially those who once believed they were untouchable. After the suspended names were announced, the entire lobby fell into a silence so heavy it felt like lead. No more whispers, no more nervous laughter, hiding behind hands, only lowered eyes, trembling shoulders, and the unsteady breaths of people who for the first time understood that their cruelty had just been exposed before the whole company. Grace Turner stood beside Jackson, her face showing no trace of triumph or vindication. Instead, her calmness made more people tremble than any shouting ever could. In that moment, they realized something they had never understood. The silence they once mistook for weakness was the strongest force in the entire room. A mid-level manager standing toward the back, Henry Walsh, who had witnessed countless incidents, but chose to look away, swallowed hard. He looked at Grace, and what hurt him most was that she did not look back with blame. It was her lack of accusation that became the harshest verdict against him. Others felt the same. None of them had ever imagined that a simple woman with a cloth tote bag and homemade lunches, someone whose name they barely bothered to remember, now stood as a mirror reflecting the pettiness they had normalized for years. Some bowed their heads, their backs curling, as if trying to escape Grace's line of sight. Yet she stood there, saying nothing, and that silence forced each of them to confront themselves. Jackson broke the suffocating stillness with his steady, resonant voice. Summit Dynamics is not built only on systems or contracts. It is built on people. And these past days have shown us that we have forgotten the most important thing. He turned to Grace, then to the entire staff. You do not need to know who she is to treat her with dignity. Kindness is not something you reserve for those above you. It is something you owe to everyone. A single tear slipped down the cheek of a young employee in the back row, not because of punishment, but because he realized he too had contributed to the coldness that had drained the humanity from the company. On the right side of the lobby, Ellen Ross stood quietly watching Grace with a look of pure respect. She knew not everyone had the strength to stay silent under humiliation. Not everyone had the steadiness to stand firm before a cruel crowd. And she felt relieved knowing the small kindness she offered Grace had not been wasted. At last, Grace spoke, her voice soft but resonant like a single note plucked from a string pulled tight. I do not want Summit Dynamics to fall apart. I want it to be a place where even the weakest can walk in with their head held high. That sentence placed the final period on every remaining trace of resistance in the room. The lobby fell completely still, so silent, no one dared inhale too deeply. Some truths did not need shouting or threats. They were powerful, simply because they were right. Jackson placed a hand on Grace's shoulder, then looked down at the entire staff. Today is not a day of punishment. It is a day for us to begin again. But everyone understood that to begin again, they would first have to face the mirror named Grace Turner, the woman who needed no title and no authority to make an entire building bow before the truth. When the meeting ended, the crowd slowly dispersed, but no one moved with the careless confidence they once carried. Every step was slower, as if each person was reconsidering who they were and who they had become. Summit Dynamics no longer felt like a place where mocking laughter echoed daily. It now stood like a door hinge, turning between a toxic past and a clearer, more honest future. Jackson Turner stepped down from the podium, but did not leave immediately. He turned back to Grace, his eyes filled with pride and a quiet ache, and Grace answered with a small nod, telling him she was all right, that she had walked through the storm and remained standing. The Ethics Committee began announcing the launch of Respect Has No Rank, a new code of conduct that Grace herself would lead across the entire corporation. She was appointed as the Global Culture and Compliance Officer, and for the first time, employees looked at her not with scrutiny, but with genuine respect. In the hallway, a few people approached her to apologize, not seeking forgiveness, only seeking the courage to face their own wrongdoing. Grace listened to each of them, offering no blame and harboring no resentment, because she understood that forgiveness was not erasing the past, but closing the door on it so the future could walk through. Standing before the tall glass windows, watching the city of Seattle sink into the colors of sunset, Grace exhaled a long breath, as if finally setting down a weight she had carried far too long. She knew the journey ahead would be long, but this time she would not be walking it alone. And in that quiet moment, Jackson gently took her hand. He said nothing, but both of them knew that from this day forward, Summit Dynamics had changed, because sometimes all it takes is one person brave enough to stand firm in the dark for an entire building to step into the light. From the perspective of an expert in organizational culture and human behavior, Grace Turner's story is far more than an office ethics incident. It is a mirror reflecting the fractures that many modern companies quietly carry, the numbness toward injustice, the normalization of cruelty, and the distorted belief that power lies in titles rather than character. At Summit Dynamics, the cold marble lobby where Grace's dress was pulled was not merely the scene of a disrespectful act. It was the stage where the company's true culture revealed itself. Because culture does not appear in glossy brochures, nor does it live in polished speeches delivered at quarterly meetings. Culture is how employees treat the person they believe does not matter. It shows up in every mocking laugh, every dismissive glance, every seemingly small action that carries the power to break someone. And the most frightening part is not the bad behavior of a few individuals, but the silence of those who watched and did nothing. According to research by Harvard Business Review, more than 70% of workplace bullying cases do not come from a lone perpetrator, but from an environment that enables it. The people who join in the ones who laugh along, the ones who know it is wrong, but stay silent to protect their own comfort. On the day Grace was humiliated, if even one person had stepped forward and said, "Stop," everything could have been different. But no one did, not a single person. And that was the moment when the company's true culture became unmistakably clear. When Chairman Jackson Turner appeared and revealed that Grace was a co-founder, the office froze not because of shock, but because they realized they had misjudged the one person they should never have misjudged. But the truth is, they were not wrong about her job title. What they were wrong about was the value of a human being. If Grace had not been the chairman's wife, if she had simply been a regular employee, would their actions suddenly become acceptable? Would her humiliation somehow weigh less because she held no power? The answer is no. A healthy organization never measures a person's worth by their title, their salary, or how they dress. A healthy organization measures its integrity by how it treats the most vulnerable person in the room. And that is why Grace's silence was more powerful than any confrontation. She did not yell, she did not retaliate, she did not use authority to intimidate. Yet her stillness exposed the true chaos inside Summit Dynamics. In cultural leadership training, we call this the mirror effect. When one person's calm unintentionally reflects back to the group exactly what they have become. Mocking laughter suddenly looks shameful. Jokes suddenly look cruel. And the most confident people suddenly realize they are the emptiest. That is the power of truth. It does not need noise. It does not need argument. It only needs light aimed at the right place. This story shows that company culture is never built by slogans. It is shaped directly by the smallest behaviors repeated every day. And the harsh truth is this: you can hire the best talent build, the most beautiful offices design, the most impressive policies, but without kindness, it all becomes meaningless. The most important layer of a company's culture is the lowest one, where the most junior employees still feel safe, respected, and valued. When Grace spoke at the end of the story, she did not give a long speech, but every word became a moral verdict for the entire office. The most painful part is not what you did to me. It is what you did to yourselves. What makes that sentence powerful is that it holds true for every company, every team, everywhere. Cruelty distorts the victim, but it destroys the perpetrator completely. If this story made you think more deeply about your own workplace, about how you treat the people who have nothing to offer you, or about how we all might have contributed to someone else's hidden wounds, leave a small sign to show you felt what Grace hoped to share. If you believe that every organization, big or small, must begin with kindness tap. Like so, this story can reach more people. If you want to follow more journeys about humanity, justice, truth, and the moments that turn everything upside down, hit subscribe so you do not miss the next story. And before you go, leave a very short comment below the video, no more than 3 words, to show that you understood today's message. A simple phrase, respect first. Just 2 words, yet enough, to remind not only yourself, but anyone who reads it, that respect must always come before power, before titles, before everything. Because in the end, the culture of an organization is not built from slogans, but from the way we treat one another day after day, hour after hour.